Welcome to Mid-Level Adventurers, a podcast where non-experts talk about the things they love. I'm Jarrod Jehoda, and with me for this first series is my co-host, Matt Morris.
Hello everyone, it's Matt Morris.
Dungeons & Dragons is a fantasy role-playing tabletop game where the players conceive of characters, concepts they desire to play. But beyond the mechanical details and minutiae lie the narrative elements. How does one bring these elements to life? In previous episodes, we have discussed character options, backstories, but how do you breathe the essence of life into those elements? How do you find your connection to the character? And does it even matter if you do? It's time to tread the boards this week as we talk about role-playing. So Matt, what is role-playing? What does it mean when we say role-playing?
Role-playing is watching Critical Role and then doing exactly what... No, I'm totally kidding. While I do encourage people that are interested to watch Critical Role, no. By all means, you don't have to emulate them at all. I think in the simplest terms, role-play is, to borrow a term from our childhood maybe, is to play pretend.
Yeah.
You are imagining yourself as another person, as a character, right, in a story. And role-playing that character is just trying to act as they would, right? To do or say the things that this character would do.
Yeah, it's the act of embodying the character you are playing.
Yeah.
It may include doing a voice or a speaking pattern or an accent or even body language, or it may include none of those things. It's totally okay to not.
Yeah, exactly.
I think to roleplay, you just need to think about what your character has experienced and what they would know in a given situation, and then you decide what they would do with all of that in the current scenario.
Mm-hmm. We're saying it very basically, and it may sound a little overwhelming, so, we'll try to break that down.
The big thing I think that comes across when people talk about role-playing, it's what my character would do. But how are you supposed to know what your character would do?
That is a very good question. Excellent question, in fact. I think that determining role-play for a character, it starts with the backstory.
Mm-hmm.
Giving your character a background and something that sort of sets the scene, so to speak, for what type of person your character is now when the session starts.
Right.
And there are lots of little ways to form that. I don't think everyone has to have a novel of a backstory. We've touched on some of that, I think, in the past.
But like the basics you should know.
Exactly, yeah. Little basic things. Maybe there was a big incident that happened in your life that led to you adventuring now. That's always an easy one to try to think of. If possible, maybe stay away from the cliches. It doesn't always have to be something so big and dramatic necessarily.
Right, yeah. I think of it as, there's certain things you should know. Where and how were you raised?
Mm-hmm.
What was your family or home environment like? What relationships did you have? What was your life like before you adventured? And why did you decide to leave?
Yeah.
Knowing these things helps give you the basic idea about what type of person your character would be. In real life, we are the sum of our experiences. That's how we develop and grow. So what has happened to us in the past informs our decision-making process for future events. And it's just like that in role-playing in D&D or any other tabletop game.
Mm-hmm.
Has your experiences led you to become a patient person, or are you impulsive? Are you boisterous and loud, or are you quiet and meek? And once you kind of have those ideas figured out, you can figure out how such a person would react in any given situation, scenario, adventure.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are other little things that go along with when you're in the creating a backstory phase, things that are important to consider to make an interesting character that will also help inform you of what choices that character might make. For instance, I think a big one that is probably overlooked most of the time, unfortunately, is a flaw, or flaws in general, perhaps, because no one is perfect. Giving that character a flaw gives them an interesting characteristic that may come up in some situations that allow you to roleplay in a unique way.
Yeah, there's a chink in the armor.
Yeah, exactly. It could be you have trouble telling the truth, or maybe you just tell white lies. It doesn't have to be something like, I'm secretly a murderer.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about like that extreme, just like a little thing that gives your character, sets them apart. It helps flesh them out. It keeps them from being two-dimensional.
Yeah, if you're playing a character that was raised in an amoral society or in an amoral group, then they're probably not going to care about the rules of any given city or town that they go into.
Yeah.
However, if another member of the party is very much like, no, these are the rules, you have to obey the law, that's going to create an interesting dynamic between those two characters.
Yeah, maybe that character's flaw is they follow the rules to a fault.
Yeah, even to the detriment of themselves. They will not cross the street if the light is not green.
Right. I want to bring up an important thing I think about flaws before we get too much further. I think that a flaw can cause some issues if you're maybe playing too much into that. For instance, I'm playing a selfish character. That's my flaw. And then maybe that causes some tension with the other party members. I think conflict can be interesting, but I think your characters should have room for growth. Maybe they work on that flaw through the course of your story, and how you choose to do that is up to you. And I think it is important to try to remember that creating a cooperative character is generally just going to play nice with others, even if they have qualities that are not perfect.
Yes, using the excuse of it's what my character would do to steal stuff from other party members is not going to be looked at favorably, even if you do have a sticky-fingered character. You also are part of a group.
Right, yes.
If you have a friend who's constantly stealing your stuff when you're at parties, and everybody knows it's this person, why would you keep inviting that person around? Like, you wouldn't. You'd be like, no, you're a klepto, get out of here.
Exactly. So just something to consider. You and I have talked about this with characters I have made. I think another important part of helping determine what your character might do is giving them goals, or perhaps maybe just one big goal. But I think sometimes smaller goals may be nice too. Maybe it's not something that you're going to, every session, you're going to not necessarily be working toward that perhaps, but on a long-term scale. And giving them dynamic goals allows them to change as well. Narrate your choices a bit.
Totally. Having an idea of things I want to accomplish as my character is a good mindset to have. And it can help you identify with that character, especially if you're someone who's shy or not an actor.
True.
Which I guess leads us into, if you are a shy, non-actor individual, how do you roleplay? And I think it's a common feeling, especially amongst new players.
Mm-hmm.
There is this large misconception kind of in the cultural zeitgeist that you have to dress up and do funny voices in order to play D&D. Mm-hmm. Like, anytime I talk to anyone who has never experienced D&D, the first thing out of their mind is, oh, do you dress up? It's like, no, I don't. There are people who do, and that's cool, wear that cloak, wear that wizard hat, like, rock it out, baby.
Right. If it helps with make the character, hey.
But I think this is due to parodies that people have seen in TV and in movies like Saturday Night Live and stuff like that.
Oh, even throw out Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, Big Bang Theory. Even shows like Critical Role can intimidate new or existing players, making them feel like they need to step it up.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just not true. Critical Role is made up of professional voice actors.
Right.
They do it for a living. Yeah, they're playing their game and they're having fun and they're getting invested in their characters, and honestly, that is the draw. But they will be the first people to tell you, don't play our game. Our game works for us because this is who we are as people.
Right.
Make your game work for you.
Exactly.
No one should be made to feel uncomfortable at their game table. We all want to play this game. We all want to have fun. So if you aren't comfortable doing an accent at the table, don't.
Right.
You can totally convey in the third-person narration what you want your character to do. You can just be like, I think Lachlan would try to negotiate for a better deal by charming the shopkeep.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is totally okay to do a third-person narration if you are uncomfortable hopping into a voice or a different accent or something like that. There's nothing wrong with that. My best friend has been trying for years to get his wife into D&D. Only recently has he succeeded, but her big hang-up was this fear of embarrassment. She didn't want to do a voice. She didn't think it would be okay if she didn't do a voice, but everybody else at the table does. He was able to organize a small group with him as the DM and her as a player, and then her best friend as another player, to go through the adventure using the D&D Basic Essentials starter kit that they market.
Mm-hmm.
And now not only is she grown comfortable with the game, but she enjoys it and looks forward to it, and my best friend could not be happier. He is so proud of himself for getting his wife into D&D.
Well done. I'll have to take some notes and tips on how that happened. No, I think that's an excellent option, and it is totally valid. I know we've said it before, and we will keep saying it just as reminders. I think whatever makes you feel comfortable, and something that is still very descriptive as a way to roleplay your character's actions, is to narrate them. That doesn't mean you always have to speak out as them in their voice or whatever. And sometimes you can say more almost by just describing, I cast them a side-eyed glance because I don't like half-elves or something like that, than walking up and trying to think of hey, you're a half-elf and you're dumb. I don't like half-elves.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's also important to note, if you are an actor or someone who fancies himself an actor or just someone who enjoys that aspect of doing voices, doing roles, go for that too. Have fun with it. But be mindful of the other people in the party that may not be so comfortable doing that. Try not to overshadow them or make them feel out of place. And I don't mean hold back your enjoyment of the game. I just mean be mindful of other people.
Yeah, let everybody play how they want to play. As long as you're all working together in the group in the game, go for it. Enjoy it. You don't have to all be voice actors. Nobody should try to be Critical Role.
Right.
Everybody should just try to have fun with their game.
I think a healthy mix is perfectly fine. And I see that probably in every game, honestly. I don't think I've ever been in a game. Not that I've been in many, but I don't think I've been in any that I can think of where everybody was doing the same thing as is their interpretation of role-playing. And that's fine. Full disclosure, I'm not the best at it myself either, right? Watch Newly Forged and you'll see. But some fun tips that I'd like to share that I think could be really unique in working on like other ways to roleplay could be making a catchphrase for your character, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
You know, something that they might say when trouble happens. You know, like Han Solo's like, I got a bad feeling about this.
Right.
Think of what responses they might have in character to different situations. Maybe it's more than a catchphrase. Little things like that will just start to give your character a voice that is different than your voice, even if you're not using an accent. Simple things like that can just start to like, oh, when you're speaking in character, it starts to sound like a different person, even if you don't have a weird accent when you're talking, as you know.
Yeah, indeed. Not everybody needs to be this high-talking, really quick-speaking gnome. Like, that's not what you're talking about. Like, it could just be you're just a guy who likes to think before he speaks, you know? Or maybe you're a turtle and you talk like this. All of these are things you can do. Do you need to do any of them? No, absolutely not.
No. Yeah, if you watch Newly Forged, you'll see kind of, I think, the full gambit on that. Like, people that are comfortable just more or less just speaking and then describing their actions to players that are doing like full voice all the time, which is really exciting and I think very fun to watch.
And even if you are someone who wants to do the voices and all that stuff, there might be days where you just don't have that energy. And that's okay too. Like, you can still play the game if you want to play the game.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you're not as engaged vocally as you normally are, and that's okay. It's okay to swap it out if you're just not feeling the role-playing aspect for a certain day.
And it probably helps to take turns too sometimes. You don't always have to be the one speaking. Let the other party members have their role-playing opportunities also.
Right. I'm glad you brought up this idea of catchphrase, because it leads to the question of, is it okay to pilfer from pop culture?
Well, that is a good question. I'm going to say generally yes. I think it's okay. Like, I don't think anything is necessarily off the table. I do that sometimes myself. There are maybe like pop culture characters that maybe give me some inspiration for the character I made and might offer a little bit of guidance, I guess, on how to play that character if you're trying to like go for a certain vibe.
Right.
I think there's a fine line, right? If you're just like straight up quoting Star Wars to table direct movie quotes for your character every time, that might be less interesting because it's not adding enough of your own personality into the character. So yeah, I would say fine line. What do you think though? I mean, you've seen a lot more people do this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. Yes, use pop culture as inspiration, but don't let it define your character. Don't make a carbon copy of The Terminator. Don't make a carbon copy of Indiana Jones.
Right.
Just use one thing as inspiration and then build from there. For example, my best friend, he loves puns and pop culture.
Yes, he does.
In our in-game career where we have been playing D&D together, he has made characters such as the halfling wizard named Willow the Grey, a portmanteau of Willow and Gandalf right there. He has made a fighter named Shepard Commander.
Oh, yeah.
Which those of you who are aware of Mass Effect might see as a swapping of Commander Shepard.
Yep.
He has made a barbarian named Brittany of the Spear. And he has made a monk named Cain.
Oh, okay.
Which, if you are not familiar with that reference, there is a 80s TV series called Kung Fu The Legend Continues, and the main character in that is Cain.
Mm-hmm.
And these just kind of scrape the surface of things that he does and things that are possible. I myself have made NPCs based on pop culture references and characters. For example, in Newly Forged, I made Trip Sharp Hunter, who is this gnome that rides on the back of a Kuthrik, wears white leather fedora and a leather jacket. He's basically Indiana Jones, except as a gnome.
Right.
And it's just funny. But you can use Indiana Jones as a reference. Use Gandalf, use Hawkeye, Iron Man, Batman, whatever. I've seen a dwarven cleric that was inspired by a televangelist preacher.
Oh, interesting.
If you find something to use as inspiration, go for it. Especially if it is your first character. Having a reference point for you to really identify things about your character Be like, oh, I want to make a character that's like Batman. Okay, cool. How are you like Batman? It gives you that reference point. If it gives you the kind of help to role play that you may need, if you're familiar with that type of character, then totally make that connection. Use it as the inspiration. I'm all for using pop culture, plus it's just funny.
Yes. Yeah, I think a fair amount of that is going to be fun and keep it entertaining. Because I think it should be light too, right?
Yeah. So using role-playing doesn't just have to be limited to interacting with a shopkeeper, interacting with each other. There's this whole idea of, do you role-play only out of combat, or can you role-play in combat? And what does that mean? Like, what does it look like when you role-play in combat?
I think role-playing in combat is actually really fun. I do feel like oftentimes it can get missed if the combat is like really rolling. The turns or the rounds are becoming, like this person's turn, you do this, and then this is what happened, and then the next. So, I don't think you should sweat it if you had a little fun RP thing you wanted to do and it got missed. Just roll with it. But I think it can be fun to add a little flair. Because we've talked about this, right? Sometimes the DM, Jarrod does this, will describe the action of what's happening to make it more interesting than you rolled a 9, so you didn't hit the bandit moving on. No, it's like, okay, well, the bandit skirts out of the way in the last minute, saw your blade coming. And so maybe adding a little character improv to that at the end of your turn might be fun. Maybe you simply just say, I'm going to get you next time, or something.
Right.
Just to kind of keep the flair going a little bit. Every character is going to kind of play combat differently anyway, so it may, really paint a better picture of how this quiet, sheepish turtle actually interacts when he's in the midst of battle.
Also, in combat, the decisions that you make in terms of how you attack your enemies.
True.
I don't think my character would know XYZ, so I'm going to go do this.
Mm-hmm.
Or we've spent enough time battling together, I know that he would want to take a prisoner instead of just obliterate everybody and kill them all.
Yeah.
So roleplay doesn't mean actually you only have to speak. It's just guiding the character through choices that they would make based on the information they would have.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in D&D where choices matter more than in combat.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think combat is a totally legitimate place to have roleplaying go down.
And it may, for better or for worse, I suppose, help prevent you from the occasional and accidental metagaming in combat, because I think it's easy to do unintentionally as a player.
Right.
You might know that if I stand here, it'll help this character get advantage in their next attack because they're flanking. But is that something your character has discovered in combat yet? Maybe we'll keep you honest. And then maybe your character does learn legitimately through when I stand here, then I can distract the enemy. And this guy can really put that sword in the right place. Oh, next time I'm going to have to flank.
Yeah.
I might get you killed too, being too honest.
That's what combat is. It's an experience, and you can learn from it, or you can die from it. You can
die trying.
Yeah, you can absolutely try. You can always try. One fun little thing we like to do here on Mid-Level Adventurers is go to our tavern corner and talk about what we are imbibing tonight. So, Matt, what are you imbibing this evening?
Well, tonight, I've decided to go back to a spirit, actually. So I know last time I broke the rules, sort of, and went with coffee, but it was...
There are no rules.
Right, there's no rules in the tavern. It was something unique. I wanted to experience and talk about it. So here again, I have something else that I was able to bring back from Colombia. It's a rum, and I don't know much about rum. I'm not a huge rum drinker, so I'm still learning. But I got this specifically because, well, first of all, people recommended it, but it is an aged rum. So a little different maybe than some of what people see a lot in the U.S., which are sometimes spiced rums, which means they've had things added to them. So the color in this, and you can see it here, it almost looks like a whiskey.
Yeah, it does look like a bourbon or a whiskey. It's got this warm, ambery color to it.
Yeah, and all of that is from the aging. I guess I should tell you the name. This is a rum Viejo de Caldas, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that.
Is that the brewery of the family or the region?
It's the region, actually. The Caldas region is what they call in Colombia a department, which would be like a large state, basically.
Okay.
And that is where the distillery is. I don't know much about their history, unfortunately, but from what someone told me, I think it's, the tradition of the rum making made it there. It's in the mountains from the Caribbean. So it's sort of like the extended tradition of rum making.
So it was an uphill climb.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So they evidently, the Caribbean rum makers, I guess, brought that over to Colombia and they thought, wow, really like this, so we'll take it to the mountain. But it's very good. I enjoyed it a lot, and it is a 15-year aged rum. So it's got a lot of unique flavors, I think, that come from spending that much time in a barrel. It's a very low-proof rum. It's only 35% alcohol. I think some liqueurs are actually stronger than this.
So it's really a sipping rum.
Yes, exactly, yeah. The recommendation was to drink this neat. Don't add it to anything. Don't add ice to it. I mean, ultimately, drink it however you want. But to really enjoy it as it's intended, drink it neat. And I think it's perfect advice. I actually did try it on ice just to kind of compare and contrast, and I prefer the neat because it is not overpowering. The most you get is like a subtle burn at the back. Again, I'm not a rum connoisseur, but this is one that if I find again, I will definitely get.
And you got this in Colombia, right?
Correct, yeah, I got this in Colombia. So how about you? What are you imbibing tonight?
I am much more local tonight. And also doing a bit of a sidestep from what I normally do. I'm drinking a cider tonight.
Oh, very nice.
Yes, I am drinking Doc's cider. But I am not just drinking Doc's hard apple cider. No. I am drinking Doc's hard apple pumpkin cider.
Oh, my.
And I know what you're going to say. It is February. It is not freaking November, Jarrod. What the hell are you doing drinking a pumpkin-flavored thing? I actually really, really like this cider. I've had it before. It's made by Warwick Valley Wine Company up in Pine Island, New York. Warwick Valley kind of area.
Okay.
I've been to the brewery before. It's this very cute little kind of apple orchard. The cider has the sweetness of the apples, but you also get kind of an earthiness of the pumpkins. But it also has cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and it's very rewarding, and it's very crisp and very refreshing. A lot of ciders have a tendency to be too dry and too sweet, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Their main apple cider, their hard apple cider, it is a little too dry and a little too sweet for me, but something about this pumpkin cider, this pumpkin apple cider that they do, makes it really mellow and much more enjoyable to my taste. I dig it. I think the Doc's hard apple pumpkin cider is a win.
Good. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed a cider, so that'll be another one to look out for.
If you like cider and you like pumpkin spice flavor type things, apples and cinnamon go well together, so the marriage is not far off. So if you like those kinds of autumnal flavors, I would recommend this, if you can find it.
I don't think I would have considered those together, but it makes a lot of sense now that you've said it. Well, cheers.
Cheers. And that's what we are drinking tonight. I think it is important to note that role-playing doesn't only apply to the players. It also applies to DMs.
Yeah, that's true.
As a DM, I roleplay all the time. It's a little bit different, but we absolutely roleplay. And I think it helps to create relationships which help the players to get engaged and help them enjoy the game.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if I had just been like, okay, you've captured this kobold in Newly Forged, what do you want to do with him? Okay, he answers your questions. Then, like, okay, dispose of the kobold, shank him, throw him in a ditch. But because I role-played that kobold, you adopted him.
I know. Yeah.
You adopted Mies.
Yes. We spoke about this in the last episode, didn't we? Speaking of unplanned character choices at the end of combat. But that is one of our more memorable moments now. Yeah. And it's changed a lot, I'm sure, in the story.
It went from being like, okay, wipe out the kobolds and take their stuff, to now you have installed Mies as not only a worker in the mine, but a prominent worker in this mine, in this new town. And now you brought these other kobolds to work with him. Whereas if you had just killed him, then these other kobolds wouldn't have meant anything to you at all either. So by getting to know Mies, you created this idea that kobolds are more than just the adversaries to be slayed and slaughtered.
Yeah, basically. I think that there probably is a little bit more pressure on the DM, perhaps, to roleplay, to like give voices to characters and such. That being said, I don't expect anyone to be perfect either. I don't expect anyone to be, Matt Mercer, for instance, to use the perhaps overused reference now at this point. There's a DM that I played with last year that was getting back into it and quite good at being a DM, actually very much enjoyed the story. But as we quickly discovered, he pretty much had one voice for NPCs. And it just kind of became a rolling gag with us, It didn't bother us, didn't take away, because he was still talking as a character. He just would kind of like occasionally be like, oh, I don't remember now if I'm supposed to be the mayor or the guard. They all sound the same,
Right, but that goes back to what we said earlier. Like, you don't have to do a voice.
Right. You can really just speak as them, It's just about whatever style helps you tell the story, right, and be engaging. And if you're at a table with friends and it's a comfortable situation, then go for it, even if your characters all sound the same.
Right. And as a dungeon master, I think being authentic to whatever NPCs or monsters you're playing is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes combat. We kind of mentioned briefly last week when DMs run combat encounters, they are in charge of the NPCs, of the enemies. One thing that comes up often is players can make plans. That doesn't mean that the adversaries know what those plans are. Even if they watch them, they may not know everything.
True.
So being authentic to what that character knows will impact combat.
Sure.
It's just one of those things where role-playing as a dungeon master can sometimes be really difficult because you as the dungeon master might know how to counter this thing. But if the NPC that you're running to combat the players doesn't know, that's a handicap that you have to be authentic towards.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important to make a distinction, I think, when you're playing Gurg, the hobgoblin chieftain, versus, I don't know, Smog, the dragon, they're probably going to have different ways of going about combat.
Totally. All these things kind of play into when you're running as a GM, when you're running a combat, but it's all based off of the roleplay of the character, right? Not every adversary is just going to be like, everybody attack en masse. Like, no. Some are going to attack en masse, like raging barbarians, probably going to wade right into the battle. Archers are going to hang back, hide behind stuff, and try to pick people off with arrows. That's just what they're going to do.
I don't think you have to go too crazy creating NPCs with backstories and such, but it may also be interesting to consider that, that they're not all probably extremes either. They're not all pure evil. Maybe some of them could be negotiated with.
Oh yeah, totally. I often just throw in NPCs. There are stat blocks for Archer, Bandit, Berserker in various D&D books. But they don't give you anything about the kind of person they are.
True.
And a lot of times, probably not going to come up. But if you have a party who incapacitates them instead of just straight out killing them, or wants to question them later, that's when you can be okay, this guy has a husband and 3 kids 5 villages away.
Doesn't want to die.
But their family doesn't know that they're part of this brigade of bandits. They just think he goes out of town and does business.
Ah, I see. You could probably also have a lot of fun, to some capacity, role-playing creatures and animals, or at least trying to imagine what they might do. There's some creatures where they go in, maybe a pack of wolves goes in, and all but one wolf is killed. Well, maybe that last wolf is starting to go, maybe I'm just going to run away instead of, die.
Yeah, and sometimes you get to roleplay as an animal, as a DM, which is kind of fun.
Oh yeah, when you have a druid in the party.
Sometimes the druid wants to talk to a sheep, and you got to be all right, what the hell
what does
this
sheep
know?
Say?
What would it say? Sometimes a druid talks to a sheep.
Got to prepare for everything. That is kind of the maybe the blanket statement of role-playing, as a DM at least. Prepare for the worst.
Prepare for the worst. Sometimes a druid will talk to a sheep.
Improv is obviously a lot of role-playing sometimes, following some of the steps like we mentioned earlier, of laying out the groundwork of your character and what may shape their decisions. Then you just kind of have to roll with it sometimes because it's not scripted, of course. So there may be things that come up that you're not expecting either as a player. So yeah, understanding things like the character's personality, things like that. Then that kind of maybe shapes how they might just handle situations, from a conversation at the bar to interrogating a prisoner that you captured.
Yeah. But all this being said, role-playing can be a lot of fun. But sometimes it can create tense scenarios. And we kind of mentioned this earlier on. What happens when you have a character conflict versus a player conflict? Because there's a difference between in-character conflicts and out-of-character conflicts. And especially for newer players, this can be troublesome to differentiate. Some people can become insulted or offended by what others might consider a character trait. And I think one way to mitigate this is by making the rules clear in a session 0, if you can arrange to have one, or at least make sure that everyone knows the kind of themes or behaviors that just aren't tolerated at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Misogyny, homophobia, for example. Not allowed at my table. There will never be a part where it'd be oh, you can't do that because you're a girl, will ever be okay at a game that I run.
Right.
Or oh, 2 girls can't make out, or 2 boys can't make out. It's no. Just stop. You can't do those kinds of things. However, sometimes, all horrible behavior aside, someone just plays a character that maybe likes to look before they leap. They don't worry about traps. They have all the hit points in the world, or they have a high enough armor class where they're not really worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
So they just set off traps and barge right through doors and just cause chaos and just charge in headstrong. That's the kind of character that they play. However, that might grate on other players who are trying to play a character that's more devious or more intelligent or more stealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally get that. The important thing, I think, is to remember that if it's becoming a problem, bring it up either with the person or maybe with the DM and just talk about it. And you don't have to bring it up in front of the whole group. It can be one-on-one. It's better to talk about things and make sure that everyone is having fun and smooth over any rough spots before they become real problems in the game. And that's the thing to remember, right? It is just a game. If the game isn't working for you, talk about why. Take stock, figure it out. If you can overcome it, great. I've seen players with characters who despise each other, but the players themselves trust one another to know that it's just part of the game, and you're going to play this relationship in the game, but out of the game, it's totally okay. And that does come with time and with trust in your game table. If you're a new player starting out, it's going to take you a while to get there with anybody you're playing with, even if they're friends that you've known your whole life.
Yes.
And it's one of the reasons that I like to have 5 minutes of like post-session time to kind of decompress and chat amongst ourselves as ourselves outside of the game, where we can talk about what happened in the game, but just be like, I think we need to like calm down this kind of stuff. Like it felt a little heated. I want to make sure everyone's okay. Like you just check in. And I think it relieves stress and gives folks a chance to express any concerns or misgivings they may have had in the session that just occurred.
I think you nailed it there. Talking about it, and the sooner the better, is usually the best way to go. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, necessarily.
Right.
You're a group of adults doing something cooperative. So, we have to still be able to handle those situations as adults. If you don't think you can speak to the person, maybe you don't know them well enough, then the DM may be able to help kind of intermediate there. But the longer you let it go, the more likely it may just be an issue later. And that could be anything. Maybe it's somebody's play style, just makes you uncomfortable for whatever reason. Just talk about it, bring up what makes you uncomfortable. I think that certain character choices are going to quickly and easily lead to some sort of, conflict in the story amongst your characters. And as we mentioned earlier, some of that can be interesting as part of a narrative or as part of character growth, perhaps. Some of that can be pretty interesting and unique instead of, the party is just 5 different people from different walks of life who just magically agree on everything. That's not necessarily realistic.
Yeah, even in Newly Forged, there are tensions between characters that do not exist between players.
Right, exactly.
For example, in Newly Forged, Grig and Adis, they often butt heads. But the players, Tanner and Amber, they get along fine and they communicate very well together.
Yeah, we know where the boundary is, right, of making interesting character choices that may lead to character conflict without that spilling over into, like, doing things personally against other people. And I think a big part of that is, like Jarrod said, we do like to have moments where we do talk about it after the fact. Or, there's moments where I think I know my character has done it, made choices that may have gotten the party into trouble. And I think we all taken turns at that in Newly Forged.
Yeah, and that's true across every game.
Yeah, that's going to happen. And it's okay, I think, actually, in the moment to maybe take a moment and say, hey, me as a person probably thinks rushing behind this door blindly without checking the room first is a bad idea. But right now, my character, that's the only thing on their mind. So that's what they're going to do. And you know what? That can allow character development moments and interesting role-playing moments then in the party. If, again, you're all on the same page as players and understanding that this is something that, okay, we should develop this with our characters. Maybe after the battle, the cleric has to pull the fighter aside and be like, don't get too far ahead of me because, the moment you get out of my range, I can't bring you back to life. Talk about tactics, whatever that may be.
Right.
And that doesn't mean they have to agree with you just because you're saying it. I mean, characters, that is. But it just might create some interesting role-playing opportunities out of combat.
Right. And here's the thing. Every choice you make as a character in role-playing will have a result and a consequence.
Yes.
And if one of the consequences is, like, your party is mad at you, then as a character, as if you were that person, you would probably take that and to stay with this group of people to continue this adventure, you'd probably change your behaviors or whatever in that moment.
Yeah. You are still a group working together.
You can learn and evolve as a character. You don't have to stay the same.
Exactly. And if you want it to work, if you want the party to work and you want to play it to real life, then your characters have to figure out a way to work together to stay together.
Yes.
And that could be fun. That could be enjoyable to watch. So, like, I think let those things happen, but know where the boundary is. And if things start to cross the line, then the sooner you bring it up, I think the easier it's going to be to deal with it.
Yeah, well said. So as a little bit of a wrap-up here, role-playing is a part of D&D. It's called a tabletop role-playing game.
Get over it. No, I'm just kidding.
Whoa, hey now. Way to be aggressive. But it is an intrinsic part of the game, and it can be daunting to new players or shy players, or players that have anxiety or other social difficulties, but it doesn't have to be. If you have anxiety about role-playing, talk about it with your DM, talk about it with your group, and let them know you won't be getting into it as much as others might.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're the DM, don't hold all your players to the same expectation of role-playing. Let everybody do what's comfortable for them. It's about enjoying the game and being comfortable exploring the world in the game. The big thing, if you're a player, is to know your character, be faithful to them, their story, and their choices. Whether you do a funny voice or not, it doesn't matter. Pull from pop culture if it helps you. Use whatever tools you think might aid you.
Mm-hmm.
And role-playing a different character can be a lot of fun. It can be therapeutic, it can be relaxing, it can really help you to work through problems, it can help you to escape from your mundane reality. It's very beneficial. And it has been shown in studies that when you use these parts of your brain to role-play an experience, such as Dungeons & Dragons, you remember it as you would an actual memory of you engaging in an activity. So when you recall it, it isn't, oh, I remember playing a character who did this thing. It's, hey, I remember when I did this thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Which, strangely enough, does not happen when you do it in video games. You would just remember playing the game.
Correct, yeah.
The point is, enjoy yourself, have fun with it, get into it as much as you feel comfortable with it, and maybe if you feel more comfortable, you challenge yourself as you go.
Well said. The idea of role-playing is that you get to play and act out a character that's different than who you are, and you get to make choices as that character that are different than what you might do in a situation. So it's kind of important to, remember that sometimes that might be hard to think what a character would do when it is maybe so different than what you personally might do. But that's okay.
Yeah.
It's something you'll get better at, and I think I would encourage the players that are more comfortable taking on that role to just be patient with the party members who are not, and just encourage each other.
Totally. Well, we would like to thank you all for joining us on this week's adventure into roleplay. Please come back next week where we will be doing our first episode where we review a source book. We will be talking about Tasha's Cauldron of Everything.
Very cool.
Yeah, so remember to check out our friend and the composer of all the music used on Mid-Level Adventurers, John D. Ivy, on SoundCloud.com. Make sure to follow us on Facebook at Mid-Level Adventurers and on Twitter and Instagram at MidLVLAdventure.
And please check out our website on Wix at midleveladventurer.wixsite.com, and feel free to email us at midleveladventurers@gmail.com. And watch Jarrod and I on Newly Forged Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/newlyforged. You can catch up on previous episodes of Newly Forged on our YouTube channel, so make sure to stop on by and like, comment, and subscribe. That's NUULIFORGED.
As always, I'm Jarrod Jehoda.
And I'm Matt Morris.
Until then, mind the traps and keep adventuring.